I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and associate producer of Poured Over, and today I am very excited to be joined by Karl Ove Knausgaard, author of the 6-book autofiction endeavor My Struggle, also The Morning Star, The Wolves of Eternity, and now The Third Realm. So I am very excited to sort of jump into this world and talk about all of this with you. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
So I have to say, my number one question as I was reading, obviously this is sort of the third book in this series, in this world. Did you know when you were writing The Morning Star that you would go back and sort of enter this world again from these other characters' perspectives?
No, I had no idea. I never know what will happen in my writing. So it was as new to me as it is to the reader, I guess.
I think that that's very interesting for a lot of people who have this idea of what it's like to write a series or what it's like to write a novel in general, that there's always this idea that it's so meticulously planned and you know exactly how it's going to go. So I think it's interesting to imagine, especially in something like a series, which we think of as having this grand arc, that you might be like, I don't know what comes next.
No, it was meant to be one book, and then it became 2, and then it became 3. And then book 3 is mirroring book 1. So it's the same kind of events, but just seen from different characters. So everything kind of changed. And for me, that meant, for instance, that there is a murder, a triple murder in the first book. It's really grotesque and really horrible. And when I wrote about that, I just wrote about a murder and whatever could be there, And then when I had to go back to it, there was an investigator and he has to investigate all those signs. And to me, they were just, completely incidental, what I wrote in a moment. So I had kind of to investigate my own novel to try to find out how this had happened. And there was a lot of that stuff in the book. So it's not planning, it's the opposite. Have to kind of maneuver in between what's already there. And that's really, it's limiting in one way, but it's incredibly exciting in other ways. It's a bit like life, You have done things are in the past that you can't, remove yourself from. You have to maneuver in between them. And it's similar in some way.
This book felt a little bit like walking through a dark house and turning the lights on as you go, that there's a room there and that there's things, but you're sort of having to choose what you see and when.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way of looking at it. I haven't thought about it like that, but yeah, there is a lot of kind of forces in the background here.
The series as a whole, this idea of this star that appears and sort of changes a lot of things for both individual characters and has implications for the world as a whole. I wonder how this all came to you to start this idea.
I never ever have ideas, really. But in this case, yeah, it was the star. And I think I was interested in the notion of something unknown, but present. It's like everything in the world and everything that turns up in the world, we know. And we have defined it and, we can explain it. And I just wanted something you can't explain to turn up in the middle of everything. Very visible. It's just up there in the sky. That I knew when I started, and I knew I wanted many people involved. So there'd be many, like a choir, many people living their life in different ways, but all looking at the same thing, thinking differently about it. That was all I knew when I started, really.
I never have ideas ever is going to be my new motto of things, because that's how I feel often. I love the idea of these many characters that we get to meet as we go through, and some of them play varying degrees of importance, I guess, in a structural sense, and yet all of them, I think, if you took one piece out, you'd lose sort of the entirety. I love the idea of sort of going back to these many voices. And it sounds like you knew sort of from the beginning that it had to be told from all these characters' perspectives versus like a third person just relaying events to us.
Definitely. It's kind of one main point of the series, and have so many voices, is that everything changed. Everything you have seen yourself could be seen differently from somewhere else. There's no such thing as a kind of fixed truth in anything, really. You have facts, but even fact you can dispute, and I am incredibly interested in that kind of area between us, because we also have to agree about incredibly many things just to make things work out, so that's kind of the area this book are exploring, really. But really interesting it became when I wrote this book, because it's the same, really exactly same episodes that I told. So, for instance, the first story in the Morning Star is a man called Arne. He's he's going on holiday with his wife and 3 children, and his wife is just annoying him, and she's something in the background, and it is very much his story that takes place. And then when I started this one, I thought, okay, what about that wife? What's going on there? And that was so interesting and so fun. And she became one of the major characters in the series, as a whole, really. Tove, she's an artist and a painter, and she kind of loses more and more control. And her problem is that her identity isn't fixed. It can change. She has some sort of, manic depressive or bipolar thing, and what she thinks about her husband is that he doesn't have that problem. He is the same. He can be, bad mood, good mood. He can be, all those kind of things, but he still will be him, and she doesn't have that. And that is also a very interesting place to write from, really. So that was the kind of something I experienced just by accident. Was how the same, exactly the same things just changed and become something completely different.
Both The Morning Star and The Third Realm have this feeling of reconstructing a moment, and they're set, in pretty tight timelines. We are looking at small expanses of time, and yet these trivial moments that can seem like they don't have all this weight all of a sudden become these threads that connect these characters in massive ways, and yet they don't always understand the consequences until later, exactly the gravity of what's happening.
Yeah, I like also the notion of, novels are stories, of course, and we're surrounded by news and its stories, but it feels so differently to be in a moment. It's so rich, and so you don't know what's going to happen, and everything is kind of undefined, always, all the time. And I try to go into that moment before it becomes a story, really. So even if I take one step back and look at it, I can say, okay, there's a story. But when I'm writing it, it is not really a story. It's just what happens in the moment there. I don't know when I'll see. And the funny thing is that these series, I've often, good questions about Stephen King, if I like Stephen King, and there is some Stephen King-ish to it. I guess it's something supernatural going on. Maybe that's the reason. I did read Stephen King when I was very young, but I haven't recently. And then I read his book on writing. I've found incredibly good and to the point and really, really useful. But he says exactly that, how things comes alive if you just, you don't know anything about what's going to happen in the next moment, and then you somehow connect to the present and to where the life is. But if you do know in beforehand, it's like prefabricated and made and not alive. So I always try to get into the places where I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know what's happening. Not all the time, of course, because that's impossible. And that is in conflict with the arc of the whole thing, with the, the plotting and everything, because it takes so long time for me. That's why I've been written 5 novels now in this series, and I've only moved forward 3 days.
I think there's this feeling of, often it comes in with writers that it either feels like the story tells you or you tell the story. And sometimes there's so much fiction that feels very prescriptive and very, not to say it's good or bad or worse, but that the author knew exactly the story that they wanted to tell. That they're hitting these beats that they feel like they should. But in these books, I feel like I never knew exactly where it was going. And, there were times where the characters would do something or something would happen and I would go, oh, not that. But that's how life is too. That's anything. I don't want the book to always tell me exactly what I want to hear.
No, there is of course a flip side to this also, because it has to be shaped and has to be formal, has to be some sort of control. So I think maybe my readers start to worry if I know where this is going, really, and I don't really. But that makes it, exciting. And it's like all these books are, piling up. And it is like if you start to write something, if you start just with nothing, you write something, and then it's some sort of gravity in what you have been writing that leads you in that direction, and then it's more and more and more, and then in the end it's just one way. You have to go down there. So hopefully that will happen.
Wasn't it with Wolves of Eternity that the beginning was something that you had written a long time before and come back to and brought back?
That was that actually have never happened before. But I wrote a Morning Star, and in this series I publish one book every year, so I really have to hurry, and I can't throw away any time. So I needed to start a new novel, and I didn't know where I should go, and then I just flipped through my things I have been writing before, and I really send everything I write to my editor. And then I found something I hadn't sent to him. Just after my struggle, I wrote 30 pages about a young man coming home from military service to his mother. His father is dead, or his little brother. And I hated it when I wrote it. I would never do anything more with it. But I never threw things away, so it was there. And then I reread it, and I thought, well, there is something here I do like. I like his attitude. I like the mood. He's kind of an easygoing lad, really, and young. And then, okay, that's the start of the novel. And then I had something else. I had read a book by an American social anthropologist called Bernstein. She wrote about Russia, and she wrote about demonstrations in Russia in the 1910s against death and against aging, like a classic old-fashioned demonstration where people have, banners and no more deaths, and I thought this is incredibly fascinating. So I knew the novel should start there, and it has to go to Russia. And then that's the novel, the way it moves from Norway to Russia and into that story with, there is a philosopher, 1870s, who thought if everyone put all their efforts into it, it is possible to resurrect every person who ever lived. That's a crazy idea, but it's part of this project. And that was how that novel came into being, just by, I had that manuscript, 30 pages, and an idea of Russia and immortality, and the working the way from A to B there. That's the novel.
And I'm glad, because Sivert has become one of my favorite characters that appears, and I think part of it is just because we have the same taste in music. But I think there's an inevitability that always shows up in these books, and I mean that in the sense that though we don't know what we're moving towards, perhaps, there's that sick dread that we know we're marching towards something in all of this, and though none of us may know what it is yet, we know it's coming.
Yeah.
There's a lot of connections to philosophy and religion and these bigger esoteric themes, art. When you sort of are crafting these things, is it more about the people themselves, these characters that allow you to go into these bigger themes? Is it starting there, or do you know the kinds of things you want to touch on and you weave them back down into the characters themselves?
Well, that's a good question. I think my experience with writing about ideas is that the moment you start to introduce a person, that's where the excitement is, that's where the kind of life is, that's where you have to go. And it's always like that. So there's only a few writers I know of that kind of managed to pull off both. It's Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain, for instance, which is a fantastic novel. And he has this duality. He managed to do both. But for me, I'm incredibly interested in those questions, kind of existential questions, and I read a lot of philosophy, but I never remember what I'm reading, and I'm a really lousy thinker. I can't think. If I try to, if you ask me, can you present Heidegger's ideas? No, I can't. But I've read so many books about him and by him, but I can't. It's impossible. But I read them. I like to read them. Don't understand them, don't remember them, but I like to read them. And when I sit down and write, it's I kind of push characters towards that interest. For instance, there is a priest, Katrine, who has this kind of this side to her. She thinks about these things. And then in the writing, it's if it just comes up and I follow it, but it's not like, has nothing to do with me really. It's the characters and what's in my subconscious really, and it's part of those people's life. And I do like it when it appears in that form much more than writing essays, just because essays are kind of cut out from the rest of the world, something separate, and which is great, but that's not where the kind of the consequences of thoughts are. Or there's always banality. I mean, there's always banality. There's no such thing as pure greatness or pure thoughts or anything. Is always banality involved, I think. But I don't plan this either. I see where those characters can take me, because myself I can't go anywhere, but with the help of character and writing and then what I'm interested in kind of surface in them somehow. And it's not sophisticated at all. It's just, I don't know what it is, but it's just writing.
I think that that's something that fiction allows us to do, is approach these things from other ways. There's concepts or things that if I tried to read like just a regular nonfiction book about, I know I would absorb and enjoy, but it would never last. But if I can read it in a novel and sort of humanize it in a different way, I think about like Benjamin Labatit's When We Cease to Understand the World, or The Maniac, those books bring something out that I can connect with and understand and synthesize differently.
Yeah, and in some way those books are truer. I mean, it's yeah.
I think that it comes back. It allows, I think, fiction in that way, differently than just a textbook kind of academic thing. It allows us to put something of ourselves in to get something back and connect a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, and it's always involves emotions and a lot of other stuff than only thoughts, really.
And art, the idea of art itself comes up in your work as well. Sort of, can we create art to understand art? And how does sort of madness and control come in? I mean, I think of Tova and her sort of seeking this creation, and when it also takes over her, or Arne and his novel He Can't Finish, or Egil and his work, sort of this pendulum between creating and what it takes from us.
Yeah, she's longing for the place where things take shape, I think, where things are formed, where nothing has been before, and basically where there are no thoughts. And in visual art, that's the place, you can go, because there's no concepts, there's nothing intellectual at all. It's very physical. I'm thinking about painting now, it's only colors and forms and nothing else. And she has this experience of the folk tales, so the mythological thinking and what that is, what comes up in them, that you can sense when you read them, and you can feel it and you can connect to it, but you can't pin it down. It's like there's some sort of boundaryless area, and it's the same in painting, and it's the same for her. And I have, I've been interviewing painters, and I've seen painters' work, and I am really fascinated exactly by that aspect of it. I once was spending a day with Anselm Kiefer, which I think is probably the greatest living artist, and saw how he worked, and I was just amazing because there were so many elements that was coincidental that he was just in the middle of something. It was more like he tried to control some kind of forces that was thrown at him, or he threw out, and that met his thinking and then met his planning, and it was like a point exactly where something came into being. That's where Tove wants to be, where things comes into being. And to do that, you have to give up a lot of control, and you have to give up a lot of notions of, yourself, really. And I think that's also why I do love writing, is because and when you read, too selfless in a way, And if you're selfless, who are you then? And what is it in you that you exist in? I'm very fascinated at those kind of. That's why there is a lot of shamans in these books and dreams, and it's all kind of the places where there are no self, really. Yeah, and Tove is somehow a person who channels that, but that's also with a cost for her, because she loses control completely and is hospitalized, and that's not fun and not good, and so on. I don't think that's kind of the consequence, but it's similar. I mean, it's you know what I'm talking about, probably.
I do. And there are so many characters in your work. I mean, Tove is one of them. Katlin is another, who are sort of being forced back and forth between these roles that they set out to play, often like parent, partner, maybe career, like priest, these roles they have versus what they are experiencing, these transition points, these hinge points that they are realizing maybe the things that they want or had are not the things that they will want or need.
Yeah, I think also that's a conflict. I mean, it's like a constant conflict in these books, is what's expected from you and what you self want, And that's the thing everyone has to balance and to deal with. And I found just that conflict. It's not even a conflict, but that kind of position very, very interesting. Relating to freedom, what is freedom? One of the characters is called Egil, and he has a child, and he really just go for it. He's a thinker, and he got money because he's inherited from his father, so he's kept free in that way. And he goes to his cabin and live the life he wants to do. He can't commit to anyone, really. He's tried, but he can't. So he's in a way free. And then his son comes, and he tried to stop it. Don't send it, but it's too late. He's already on the bus, so he has to deal with him. That's kind of almost a kind of archetypical visualization of that conflict, And where is the freedom? What is freedom? That's more true for him than any others, but everyone has that conflict also in this book. And I think the parallel then would be Isaac and Abraham in the Bible, where Abraham gets the message from God, sacrifice your son. Can you do that? Is it even possible? I mean, if you think about it for real, can you do that? No, you can't do it. It is impossible. But if it's God, if God exists, and if it's God, then maybe you have to do it. And that's where the zone he enters, and he is willing to do it. And when I was writing that, I did think about that in regard to Egil, that character. I had this priest, Katrine, and she is somehow into kind of more feminist theology. So I had to read a little bit about that, and not much, but just kind of to get a notion of what it was. And then I saw a story about another sacrifice, another father who got kind of a message of sacrificing. Then it was his daughter, and he does it. So the daughter is sacrificed to God, and that's kind of a very hidden story. I never heard about it even, but it's in the Bible, and it should be, have the same dignity and as the other one, but it hasn't. And those things happens when you're writing. It's parallels and everywhere. Things are connected everywhere, kind of underneath of the way you normally see things.
Yes, I feel like there's a lot of those sort of ways to immerse yourself in books beyond these books. I mean, there's so many things where I'm like, as I'm reading, I have to like stop and maybe not necessarily do research because it feels too much, but there's a lot in these novels that perhaps people aren't familiar with. You know, there's neurology, there's Russian philosophy, there's folklore, there's black metal. Like there's a lot of things that if you want to dig deeper into like get more context, I could spend 9 hours on Google doing that.
That's a great fun for me is to do that because my struggle was just about me and it's very limited. I have always been a reader and I studied literature for a bit and I studied art, and it was like everything else was places I couldn't go. So I couldn't read about biology or physics or chemistry because it wasn't for me and it wasn't for what I belonged to, you know. And I thought actually that what I was doing was kind of connected to life, but they were just mechanic stuff and I think I was 40 before I realized, but they are actually the people who are, you know, hands-on nature and hands-on the creation, really. And I also thought, well, maybe I'm allowed. Can I actually buy a book about biology and read it? And it's not by, you know, Walter Benjamin or whoever, but yeah, I can do that. And then I started to do it, and I find it, you know, it's crazily interesting. And I just, okay, I put it in the books and I can write about it, but I don't know anything about it really. So it's just pretend. But I guess that's what writers do, right? They pretend to know stuff. But it's so fascinating. So one of the characters in The Wolves of Eternity, she's biologist, and she's a woman, and she's Russian. So that was three things I'm not. That was really, but that was fun, and it's also very interesting to kind of follow her into that world, really, because she is, you know, on track to something. She comes from literature herself, so she, you know, she knows about science and that stuff, and then she has that knowledge into biology and starts to see science and information and stuff there too. And then I Googled this stuff, and there is books about it, and that's kind of biosemiology or something. It's called. It is something. But then I discovered in the 80s in Russia, in Soviet Union, in Moscow, there was this institute with exactly that going on. It was closed down because it was too radical somehow, but it was just, you know, wow, it's something in the world, you know, when you just start somewhere and then you follow it, and then, yeah, it did actually happen. But that was great and incredibly interesting, I think. It's, yeah, read the books.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And, I mean, interesting.
And you get these opportunities to sort of have fun with it when you have these like snippets of these characters' work within your work. You've got a piece of Egil's book, some of Vasilisa's work, some of Jarla's work, these like pieces within your pieces to say, these characters are working on stuff too. Yeah,
I like to consider writing as writing, kind of completely equal. So essays is the same as writing novels, it's the same as writing poetry, it's the same as writing nonfiction. Is everything is writing, you know. So one thing is to go into different characters, another thing is to go into different ways of writing. Yeah, you can see, oh, it's the same guy writing all of this, but it's just the sense of the richness of really of literature and of the world.
I think all your characters do have distinct voices as I'm reading, especially, you know, like I know when I'm reading from Lena's perspective versus like Sivert, they have a different feel. Do you have like a character that you either really liked to be in their head the most or someone that you really struggled to get through with?
Funny you mentioned Lena because I really liked writing about her. I think because she's very different from me, and she's young, and she's naive, of course, just because she's young, but she's also cynical. So she has this double thing, and she is doing something she knows she shouldn't do, but she does it anyway, you know, because she's curious and she wants to see what happens, and she falls in love, you know, and I really just liked writing about her, and there was something in that character that kind of, yeah, it made something. I think it really made a difference in the book also. I like to write about, and I like Tove writing about her, but she's an artist. She's much more like me than Lena is. The hard one has always been Lena's mother, Solveig. She was the first character of all I started with. And also because she's meant to be good. she has a mother who is ill, living with her, taking care of her, and she's a nurse, so she's, taking care of people. That's what she's doing. And she's giving, giving. And that is hard to write about. And also, she was the first woman I tried to write about. That was also hard. But then in the end, that didn't matter. But Line is very angry with her, and she can't understand why she's angry with her. Anyway, she was hard. And then the one I dislike and is the one in Morning Star called Jostein. He's really a creep. It was fun to write about him. It's fun to write about the creep, but it's maybe it's a bit over the top, really.
That was a wild section to get through, I should say.
Yeah.
I think it is such an interesting dynamic to both have these characters that are so vastly different, but yet to find all these points where they connect and where their lives butt up against each other. And sometimes I would have moments where I'd look at something and go, of course they, there's a connection here, or, to see where things go in the future. But at the same time, there's so much to just sort of, I had to stop myself from trying to overly think out every single thing. And I was like, at some point, I just have to let this start washing over me. And I don't need a board with strings connecting all the different perspectives. I can just enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to write now book 6. We're a bit ahead. And then I have to read through everyone, because now I need to kind of collect and gather all the different plot lines that's going on here. And I would never be able to, get everyone together in the marketplace or something, but it's going to be a challenge. We'll see.
I can't wait. I think it'll be great. One of my favorite parts, I should say, of all of your work in general, is the inclusion of music. I think music is such a vital piece of everything, both for the characters that connect to different songs, but you never have shied away from specifically saying, that's what this character is listening to right now. I think there are sometimes, there's just a looser sense of, I'm not going to say exactly the song that someone is listening to, but you're no, he's in the car and he's got Vulgar Display of Power playing. And I'm perfect. I know the feeling. But I really love that inclusion of the specific music.
The thing with music is that it's so connecting, it's connecting between people, and it's connecting you and the music, and it's just floating in between, everywhere, really. And also, to me, growing up in the 80s, then music was something different, because then you were defined through what you liked, so something you couldn't like. I remember coming to gymnasium, being 17, and I have, Clash and Cure and all the British post-punk, kind of Bunnyman and stuff. And then I had Paul Young, and I was pointed out to straight away, how can you do that? You can't have Paul Young there, But I love Paul Young. And I removed it, of course. I never wore it again, that button. Yeah, but that's kind of an identity thing from the 80s. I still have that with me, and I love to give characters music, and also then I can take music I really like myself, but I can't publicly, talk about it, even to friends, but I can put it in there and listen to it when I'm writing about them, and that's fun. And also there is a website called morningstar.no where the playlist to the characters are, which, that's fun to do.
Do you listen to music while you write? This is always something I am interested with authors, because there's such a wide range of responses. Some authors are I can't have any music playing. Some are I can have music but with no words, and some are I'll listen to anything, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I've always listened to music when I've been writing, and I can't really, at least not start a day writing without music. But I have to have something I'm very familiar with. Some novels I've written the whole novel with only one record, So I know the songs in and out, but it's just the comfort. It's like a safe place, I know this, and that's almost like they're taking care of me. Because in writing, you have to be safe, because what you're doing is incredibly unsafe, not physically, but in all other ways. It's risk taking, and you're making a fool of yourself, and all of those kind of things you're doing. But if you have a safe place, a safe house, safe music, that's my method, really. So there's been a lot of one book I wrote only with Iron and Wine, one Iron and Wine album. But now I listen much more to classical music, but the same songs, the same pieces. That's just because I'm getting old. And I realize the music I listened to for like 40 years is teenage music, really.
I mean, it's
joking. I'm joking.
I know, it's all perspective. I listened to the same music from when I was, 10 still, and I brought a Godsmack CD to show and tell in kindergarten, so it's okay. I wonder, talking about music and the other things that influence you, some of your literary influences or authors that you find yourself returning to again and again as you write these books.
When I write these books, it's all nonfiction I'm reading, and I only have, like an hour or two in the evening where everyone is asleep to read. So then I read nonfiction more or less continuously. But there are many novelists I really. There's a book that I actually have read twice, reread twice. So that's Don DeLillo and his The Names, which I read the first time when I was in my 20s, and then I read it 3 times, which is, I do really like very much what he's doing in that book. And he's such a good writer. There's so many of them, of course. Yeah, contemporary stuff. Last book I read was Rachel Kushner, Creation Lake, which I loved. It was really good read.
It's a good one. It's the noir, but turned on its head. I didn't quite know where she was going at first, and I love when I start a book and I don't know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, no, that was great. And there is a writer called Judith Hermann. Have you read her? And she's German. She's also brilliant. But there are many, many, of course.
Of course. And finally, I guess one of my things I always wonder, especially as you're sort of saying that you don't know where these books are always going, is there something that you find invigorating or, that really propels you into writing these novels now, something new, a freedom that you get from writing such a different kind of fiction?
It's much easier in one way, of course, because it's very hard to write about yourself. I mean, everyone understands that it's not easy to do if you try to be, honest. It's a freedom in that sense that, you can write about, whatever you want. They can say whatever they think, whatever they want. But the hard bit, and that's really hard, is to make it believable. In my struggle, it was just everything that was in my head is motivated, could be on the page, but here it isn't like that. So when I started out, I love Dracula. I always done that. I've read that many times since I was a teenager. And with these books, I wanted to get to a place, where there is a graveyard, and it's like a storm, and it's lightning, and there's 2 people coming, and they're digging up a grave, and they're looking for something, that kind of gothic story. And I wanted to write to a point where that was possible and credible, and you would believe it, And that's where I'm going. This is all, to me, a novel is making space to say something, and you need a space to say something somehow. I mean, to say something, a simple sentence about love, you can't start a book. You have to deserve it somehow, and then it can be said. And it's the same with, I've realized, with kind of this supernatural gothic thing, that it has to be deserved. You have to work very hard to get to a place where it's possible to actually do.
But you're doing it.
I'm trying, and I'm really looking forward to that moment.
You've got 3 more books at least to go there.
Yeah.
Or at least 3 more for us. We're a little behind, but we'll get there. But thank you so much for talking with me today about The Third Realm. I really can't wait for people to continue with these characters and to learn more. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.